everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Danielle. And that was an interesting talk by the European Commission, Manuel. I tend to be a bit undisciplined when it comes to these things. So it's like whatever I've heard, right before I go on stage, that's the thing I want to talk about. And I'm sure, actually, that's what everybody wants to talk about. So, my panelists and I, we have the opportunity to actually sort of digest what we just heard and sort of have some first reactions on that. But I was getting ready this morning and I was thinking about the panel, of course, and thinking about this term digital sovereignty, and thinking actually that there was a time in my life when I had never heard the term digital sovereignty, and when the difficult word to pronounce was interoperability. Okay, remember those days? So interoperability, we still need to know how to pronounce that, but now we also have to know how to pronounce digital sovereignty. And I, especially this fall, I think that, I'm sure that a lot of you also are attending events almost every week on this topic. And I happened to attend such an event last week, where I was presenting on the tension between digital sovereignty and open collaboration. And just in preparing for that talk, actually, I saw the Commission had published this document on the cloud sovereignty framework, which is meant to be an evaluation tool for the Commission's own procurement of sovereign cloud services in the short term. But I thought it was very interesting what Manuel said in one of the slides, and I'm sure that we all have different slides that we photograph. But the one I took a photo of was where he's talking about a single EU-wide cloud policy for public administrations and public procurement. And under that, really talking about sort of how member states can agree on a common framework for actually how sovereign clouds are going to be operationalized. And so that is why I'm very pleased to and re-energized to have this panel today, because I do think it's timely. We have been talking about sovereignty, digital sovereignty, for at least since 2016, something like that, and with some renewed interest recently. Now we have the IPCEI starting to deliver some concrete results. We have roadmaps coming from the European Cloud Alliance. We have also a 6-page document from the European Commission actually introducing measurable ways that we can evaluate sovereignty in the cloud. So I want to introduce my panelists. First, I have Gina Platt, who's interim lead of the Open Source Program Office, the OSPO, of the Dutch government, housed in the Interior and Kingdom Relations Ministry. Yes. Every moderator's favorite, right? Your name. It's 3 syllables. And now we have, following Justina Bielauskaite, yes, which is more than 2 syllables, who is the Innovation Director for the European Digital SME Alliance. I also have Enzo Ribagnac, who already introduced himself, but is the Director for Policy, Governance and Operations of CISPE. Finally, I have Arthur van der Wees, who is the Managing Director. Is that okay? Yes, Arthur's legal and also co-chair of the Cloud Edge No? Working group, coming back stronger, of the EU Cloud Alliance. So a great panel. I want to start with you, Gina, because again, talking about what Manuel said about sort of having the member states also sort of converging on some criteria for defining sovereign cloud services. We have seen in the framework that the Commission published an explicit recognition of the role that open source can play for digital sovereignty, which I really appreciated. We see similar activities happening in France, Germany, and I think also the Netherlands. So maybe if you just want to talk a little bit about, from the Open Source Program Office point of view and the Dutch government, how you see open source, digital sovereignty, and if these frameworks are helping you in any way. Yeah.
Well, let's first see if it works. It does, right?
Yes.
Cool. Well, yeah, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I am with the Open Source Program Office. I think a lot of you know what open source means, right? It's the possibility to see and modify and redistribute your source code, so the tools and the building blocks of our software and infrastructure. I think we are very happy to see this new sovereignty framework, because digital sovereignty has been a very hot topic in every government in Europe right now. I think we've seen a lot of sovereignty washing that we are increasingly annoyed with. So I'm very happy that this framework is calling that out, and that it gives us tools to assess whether a provider has comes in with the best intentions for us. I've personally been involved recently with the application side of digital sovereignty. So we're moving towards building sovereign workspaces to replace Microsoft Office and Microsoft Office 365. And that is very cool, but what we are increasingly becoming aware of is where that eventually should land, and the infrastructure beneath it. Now, we have at a national level a national cloud policy. We've had it since 2022, I think, which sort of gives us guidelines on when and how to use cloud, and which also opened the possibility for us to use public cloud infrastructure. But we've increasingly become uncomfortable with the current structure as is. So we've increasingly had this feeling of, we're not entirely sure when and where we can use public cloud structures, especially them being from non-European providers. So we're very much looking forward to the European market providing sovereign alternatives that we can actually trust and that we can support.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Justina, I want to go next to you. I'm a sort of European policy dinosaur, and everything we often hear about, or always hear about, SMEs being sort of the backbone of the European economy, etc. Yet often when we talk about cloud space, there's a focus, I think, on sort of first hyperscalers, and how do we provide European alternatives to that. And I think people then think big companies, big European company. I mean, so it's interesting for me to hear that Manuel, Matteo, and I think also somebody else from the audience mentioned the role of SMEs already, but maybe you can give your perspective a little bit on how you see SMEs being poised to take advantage of this new sort of procurement policy for Europe.
Sure. Hello. Yeah. I'm not sure. It's, no. Do you want mine? Here.
It's coming.
Yeah.
In a moment.
1, 2. No. Testing.
Yeah. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, that looks to work. So again, thanks very much for invite, and thank you for the. Some others are on. Introduction. Off. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
I think they're on it. Yes.
Okay, this is all conspiracy against SMEs.
Always.
Yeah, let's just do that. Thank you.
He's trying to.
Gentleman reaction. Thanks. So first of all, maybe I do a quick reaction, and when I get back to your question. So it's really good to hear also from national perspective with
you guys are concerned, and it's not coming just now, but it's already the results of a longer strategy being built around recommendations that has been there for some years. This is very important because we often say that Commission is there to kind of build the example for the member states, but it's really good that this interest is growing, and it's not only happening in some countries that we usually see as the leading ones, with France, Germany, but also to see that it is becoming the thing in the capitals and in all of them, because only together, having one policy and one approach to this, we can achieve any results. We are a small market, and we should be a single digital market. So this is an important part. Then looking further to what you've been asking, Sachiko, so I think, first of all, of course, we don't get into details of why sovereignty is important. We all know that since 2016 and going. But just speaking of purely economical terms, there has been a report that found that it's around 260 billion of euro that the European market is losing annually, just because of egress fees, of data extraction, licensing fees, and all these other costs. And these are mostly SMEs that are users of the hyperscaler cloud providers, and then losing this money. And this is going out of European market. It could be reinvested, it could fuel our industry, but it does not. Then, on contrary, what happened in US, I think we would never have AWS today if it wasn't for public procurement. It was CIA that first made the first major contract, and then a lot of other national agencies in United States followed. And this is what ensured the trust for AWS. This is what allowed it later to scale as well. So, of course, we are very behind, but it's also our strength. It means that we are not building one hyperscaler here in Europe, but indeed we are looking at the ecosystem, hopefully. I know we can discuss of how do we see the federation and so on, but for SMEs, not necessarily being providers of the cloud, but what is more important is being in the supply chain, because SMEs are there to provide elements, to provide software solutions, processing solutions, and so on and so forth. So this is one category of SMEs. And then, of course, the user SMEs. So we have a very big ICT market that is dominated, of course, by ICT SMEs, the ones that do build all their solutions, their innovation, and their own infrastructure. And, of course, we will not be competitive if we lose all the money, if we have to move their data somewhere out of EU, and they are least and least preferenced in Europe also by the consumers because they become more aware. So I think it's really a multi-sided type of problem that I'm happy we are talking here today about. And I do think, going back to perhaps the document that you mentioned and the framework that is developed by Digit, I think it's very right direction, looking at idea of it, looking at the criteria that had been defined. We are very well aligned with what our community has been proposing. And I think this is a very good exercise of the direction to think of what sovereignty is.
Yes, indeed. I think that for me, the interesting part was to finally, and I think that the Commission should be commended for that, for actually listing and understanding that it's a multidimensional, problem or a challenge, and at least putting on paper what how we might operationalize something that is a political concept or philosophical or anyway, like it could be at any level. But I want to go to you, Enzo, next, because I know that we had a prep call and we had discussed this document, and CISPE, I know, has come out and with a statement around this, and which brings up some critical points, let's say. So I'm happy for you to share those points, and we can have a further discussion on them. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks. Yes, indeed. CSP represents the cloud infrastructure services providers of Europe. So, of course, for us, the cloud sovereignty framework was a big deal, a big discussion internally as well. Is it good? Is it not good? I think we went through different stages. First, recognizing that, hey, finally, there is something coming out on this, because there was nothing, basically, as you mentioned, which was a positive. And then we started going into the details, looking into it. starting simulating, how can some of our members do, if they have to apply, what sort of grade would they get? Imagining, simulating. And then we're less happy because we start realizing that instead of saying, okay, this is a sovereign solution, this is not a sovereign solution, then all of a sudden you'll get a grade. And then you can be a player that is headquartered abroad, that has, human resources mostly from abroad, and still have a good grade. And, if you look at the different grades, what they call legal sovereignty, which is where your company is headquartered, where's your company from, et cetera, then it's 10%. When you look at supply chain, so where are your components from, software component, hardware component, then all of a sudden it's 20%. But what if we are talking about an SME that's leveraging components where they can, which is mostly from abroad, and they can't have a lot of stocks that they can, sorry, when I say stocks, I mean a lot of components that they keep somewhere in case they have a problem, in case there is a decision that's taken from a foreign government to say, okay, now we stop the supplying of this specific chip, as we've recently heard actually last week on a specific chip from a specific provider from a specific country. So here, it's a little strange because first you create confusion on the market, right? All of a sudden you have grades. It's not a sovereign player and a non-sovereign player. It's a sovereign player, 75%, 40%, 89%, and nobody really knows what it is and what it's not. And it's already an issue we have on the market. We have a lot of players that say, I have a sovereign solution. And when you look into it, they don't really have a sovereign solution, and we enter into the sovereign washing. And I guess when you have this framework that create grades, you still leave the door open to sovereign washing. And maybe the solution is not to have some sort of grades or spectrum of sovereignty, but rather sovereign, not sovereign. And that's more the position that we have.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot, and let's have a frank discussion around this, because what I liked about it was that, it does introduce a lot of elements that I think must be considered. And I think, what we heard from the Commission was that, there's also going to be, of course, from the contracting authority, maybe you'll have different use cases. So you talked about critical use cases where perhaps you would be looking for something specific. And I think, the way I would want to sort of approach this is more as a tool to show explicitly all the different criteria that one probably should be considering. And then I am assuming that it will be up to the contracting authority to kind of be able to consider what's important for what are we trying to promote here. And, with the upcoming revision of the procurement directive and the introduction of sort of non-price criteria, you might also want to consider other things like strengthening, for example, European SMEs, and maybe you would give another weighting. This is kind of what I'm considering. But I think that the advantage of having something written down so explicitly is that it can invite precisely this kind of feedback, and what doors are being possibly left open. But, the first step is to put things down on paper, I think. And, speaking from the open source perspective, there are also some things that are good there because it's explicitly recognizing open source, being able to access and study and modify code, for example, that brings control. And for me, one of the important things is also about having the European skills to be able to now I'm using open source speak, but can we, do we have the skills and competences to maintain a fork, of an open source project? For me, this is an important measure of digital sovereignty. And the Commission mentioned also some European SMEs, and I think that's interesting how they are, building and scaling based on open source. And I think that, Justina, we talked about SMEs also being able to leverage global technologies. I think it's important, but do we have the skills to then make sure that we can maintain it and deliver services based on that technology? Is important. Do you want to come in quickly? Otherwise, I wanted to go to Arthur.
Briefly. So just to say, I think we all meet more or less at the same point, because I agree that we should not have 20% sovereign or 15 or 75. I fully agree with you that the ambition should be that in most of the procurement, we look at this highest seal, what we call it, the tier 4 or whatever it is, that is a full digital sovereignty. And here I can only say that we should encourage the Commission and any public authorities in Europe that do procurement to mandate to look only at the highest tier, and I don't know, maybe in some exceptional situations it can go lower to almost sovereign or so, but I think that what is important is that there is courage and there is ambition that is shared by decision makers to really mandate to fulfill the highest tier. And one very, very short also on skills and competencies. I think, again, this is something what also European Commission should consider, because even in EU-funded projects, what we often see when we have trainings, awareness raising, this is still built on using Microsoft, using systems on AWS, and so on and so forth. So this should not become normality anymore, because indeed we need to train professionals and SMEs, especially as well, to use alternative tools and to learn how to migrate as well. So I think this is something still overseen.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to move on from, I love this framework. So I just, and not love this framework, I didn't mean it like that, but I love it as a starting point for discussion, because once you have something concrete, you can respond to it. And for me, one of the things that, I was thinking about for SMEs, for example, and how we strengthen European SMEs, I participated in a panel last week, and which featured I was at an event, and there was a panel featuring VCs who are investing in open source. And there I was thinking, of course, we should not go for a low score. Nobody wants to say we only want a very low sovereignty score here. I think, what I think the Commission is trying to do is to encourage an overall market that is looking to increase their score, and that can only be a good thing, I think, in the sense of not just being able to put a label that you have defined yourself. At least it should be based on the criteria that has been put there. But it does raise it's not a simple, I don't think it's a simple issue, because imagine an SME, a very promising SME who has managed to attract VC and some, funding, and some of it is coming from the US. But the entrepreneurial spirit is here, the developers are here in Europe, and they are the kind of SME that we should be encouraging, I am assuming, if they have attracted such funding. But then would they get a lower score because they are depending on financial investment from the US? This is the sort of thing that I still think it's, it allows us to consider. Yes, Arthur, please. I wanted to bring you in because, also maybe putting this into context with the work that you're doing in the working group.
Of course.
And
so see very
patiently waiting also.
Yeah, definitely. And I see a very relaxing picture on the screen. So I think you're gonna need it because no, it's fine. I think you're gonna need it, a relaxing picture, because I absolutely do not agree with you being. Praising this particular framework. First of all, it should not have been called a digital sovereignty or sovereignty framework. It's not about sovereignty. It's good it's there, fully agree. It does identify proper elements, but these are mentioned as objectives. It is not an objective. So sovereignty is not an objective. It's either there or it's not. So that is one of the really problems I have with it. Secondly, of course, DG Digit it made it for a particular tender. So they made it contextual, not as a policy instrument, not in the consultation mode. So it doesn't bring decisiveness. So it's been written for keeping the door open for non-EU, which is okay. But if we want to talk about digital sovereignty, it shouldn't be. So either you say you're decisive, so with fail or pass, or you're not decisive. And this particular framework is not decisive on the topics. You see it also on the terms that are used. It's to the extent of, it says it may, it talks about a degree of. Let's face it, qualitativeness is really good in life. But when we talk about digital sovereignty, we need to be clear whether it's a yay or a nay. Certain topics may not be easy to make it objective, we get that, but others are relatively easy. to do. And an example, yeah, if a European early stage company is doing really good, but it has got funding in from non-EU, whatever country it is, by the way, it can also be coming from China, for instance. And with that, the control is not anymore with the EU citizens or with the company. It is decisively not digital sovereignty based on what we want to do in the EU. So I'm not very happy with it. Also, I looked a bit further into the contract paper that is behind it, and the contract paper you see, the contracts is basically 1990 software licensing with a little bit of cloudifying it, talk about services, but it is not a proper set. It doesn't include things we already have. Let's face it, digital sovereignty, autonomy. We have a lot of regulations already in place, a lot of policies in place. Manuel mentioned the Data Act very, very quickly, but we have many others also on cybersecurity topics. Some are still open discussions. Let's not talk about the EUCS on the Cybersecurity Act, but it's now we are going for the 2.0 version. So
I think this framework is going to be influential, a key influence also on the cybersecurity.
But on just one thing on the reason why perhaps we're not talking about sovereignty too much, because we also had other countries talked about autonomy or strategic autonomy or open autonomy, but there are already regulations codified in cybersecurity that talk about digital sovereignty already, and there is no definition. That is indeed, but I think you don't necessarily need a definition there. Do we need a definition for healthy? Do we need that? So you either are or you're not fit to fly. Yeah? If you look at aviation, you need to have a medical in order to be able to fly a plane. So now the positive news is, of course, I'm also indeed a co-chair of the EU Alliance for Digital for Industrial Data, Cloud and Edge. So it's not only cloud, which is good. It's also edge nodes, and running your company on a chip. Why not? That's one of my objectives. And we indeed have a task force on digital sovereignty as well, and trying to first of all, with a lot of stakeholders here in the room, and thanks for helping out with that. In trying to identify indeed what are the dimensions you need to think about. We have 3 dimensions and what kind of criteria, so not objectives, we need to talk about. And with criteria, you can be a bit more clear in whether you either meet it, don't meet it, and then with a couple of criteria, like operational criteria, there is you meet it, but not at perfect level yet, right? So there's a sort of a fail pass, and we have fail partially pass and a pass. It's also because we know that most of our, also here people in the room, organizations, do not fully run their IT systems on anything EU. Right? Talk about hardware, infrastructure, those kind of things, software. So there's also a sort of an incentivizing approach that we want to put in for organizations actually to improve their digital sovereignty if they think it's important for their customers. Right? It is not always necessary, perhaps. So, we're quite far. We're working now on the input paper. So basically, drafting what we have created. So we have the methodology there and the way to try to figure out what the outcome is, how to visualize it. We're gonna talk about it. We would work with the scores. We want to have the nice equation on page 6 of the framework. I'm impressed by the equation. It's actually not that difficult. But so, what is the outcome? What can we do with it once you have run through all the criteria?
So I fear it's going to be we could start a philosophical debate anyway. Is digital sovereignty sort of an pass-fail? Are is it like being pregnant? Or is it more like I think that if you do the analogy more about sort of self-determination and freedom to act, like Hanifa talked about, I don't think it can easily be translated into a clear pass-fail, because if you look at, for example, if European capabilities is sort of an important aspect, which I think it is, then, there's always going to be a scoring, and I think that pass-fail and a scoring, but possibly, which is more, I think that, the framework already talks about, in a way, having sort of a gate like a minimum level, and then you can have a scoring. But let's move on, I think, because we have already heard not so happy. I think what we wanted to say was, at this point, what would you like to see? How could you bring meaningful, what's needed to improve the competitiveness of the European cloud providers? Because I think this is what's driving a lot of this. We have seen from DG Connect for many years sort of this worrying graph of the increasing importance of the cloud market and the relative decline of European companies being able to capture that market share. And so now we have the geopolitical aspects thrown into that. But if we think about that, the driving force is sort of how do we make European cloud providers more competitive, then what do you see would be needed? And in a way, like, does that necessarily translates into more digital sovereignty? That's a different question, but how do we make European cloud providers more competitive?
I guess it's for me.
Yes.
So I was
ready.
Yeah, I was taking the mic to just say one more thing, and I swear I'll go back in line right after. The other issue that is a very important one concerning the spectrum or grading is, again, I mentioned readability, right? You mentioned pregnancy, but I think organic food and food industry in general is the perfect thing. No consumer would go and say, oh, it's a little bit organic or it's not a little bit organic. No, I want to be careful, so I'm buying organic food and I know it's healthy. So I just wanted to add this because
it was an agreement because, of course, I grew up on. There's also biodynamic food,
exactly.
Which goes a bit
there are other
further,
ways,
right? So
exactly. So, but every time biodynamic, organic, etc., it's always a pass or fail. So I think that's the readability that I was mentioning before.
Yeah, but the analogy there, which I think is important, is that there was a lot of, if we can go into food labeling and things like that, the EU actually acted because there was a lot of, interest from the market in what is like bio food or organic, and there was a kind of labeling thing where consumers were being misled. So I think what the EU rightly did was to at least create a label that maybe didn't, that set the standard for what is required to have the EU label and not just having it as a marketing tool. And I think this is the same here. Yeah. We're trying to get to that point. What is required to have the EU sort of sovereign label or something like this, and not just rely on what companies marketing and sovereign washing, right? So, okay. What else is needed? Maybe we can go to Gina. What would you like to see from the public sector point of view?
Well, let me say one more thing about the last topic.
We don't want to go.
And then I promise
I'll continue. Also, I mean, we wanted to have an engaging discussion, also on something that's on the table. So let's not force it. Talk about what you want to talk.
Yeah, no, I think maybe I've been in government for too long, but I was actually very happy to see the framework, and I was actually impressed with there being a scale instead of it being a black and white issue, instead of it being digitally sovereign or not, which we kind of right now have in our national policy. And as soon as you fall into the not, it becomes very difficult to discern, like, okay, and then how can we get there? Or what are the alternatives then? So I like that it's a scale, and I like that it lays out a path towards becoming more digitally sovereign, also for the vendors. As to the question of what would I like to see change or differently, I think we as government need to get out of our way. I think we need to support the market providers, the cloud market providers more, especially European ones, obviously. And that goes to our procurement, our sourcing, this framework being very useful in signaling what it is that we are looking for in the market. So I think us communicating more about what is necessary and then actually enabling and working with the public and private cloud market is what I would like to see more.
Justina? We talked in the prep call actually about sort of more I guess, industrial strategy. So that's another topic that I care a lot about, because that's, of course, if you identify what's needed to be sovereign, then what do we also need to support and maybe actively support? I think this is an important question.
Yeah, and I will definitely get to that, because I think we are all more or less aligned. I fully agree we should not be buying something what is somehow a little bit sovereign just because it's somewhere in the great. No, we need to buy those that are sovereign. I think that's clear. Yeah. But I agree with what Gina, you see it, is that scale is good to know where we are going. When in practical implementations, do we write this as objectives or much better as a very concrete criteria? Definitely for criteria. But I think what's important in this discussion is that we have some kind of common headlines where we agree, yes, that feels like sovereignty to all of us. And I think that we kind of agree that all these things together should somehow make sovereignty. So that's a positive output here. Now, what I think we need is indeed not one specific guidelines for one specific procurement procedure. That's a good example. That's the tone setting, and it's very good when it comes from European Commission. As I said, I think this is empowering and also a good example for member states, especially for those that maybe don't have their own framework or do need guidelines. It's a good inspiration. But we need to be more ambitious and we need to go ahead of this. So one step ahead is that, of course, we have CAIDA, and that could be a place to define what sovereignty is for us. And when the rest, like public procurement rules, especially in every specific procurement, could refer back to that. It's a little bit as we do with standards, no? We have technical specifications, and we say, okay, the right way to do it maybe could be the other one, but this is the easiest way to assess this, and I think it could be one way. But then even beyond CAIDA, now we have solution for the cloud. Then we also look for solutions in cybersecurity, and then we will look for solutions in semiconductors, and it goes on and on and on and on. And this all should not be small fixes into each problem every time. There should be this common framework as industrial strategy, that these are criteria, these are all the things that we want to see when we develop technology, we buy technology, and we should all agree that this is the direction where we go, and then all the rest of the legislations align. When we have a side problem, for example, DMA, so what if I want to switch from my non-European hyperscaler to a European provider, and the money it will cost me, the problems, the skills, the capacity that probably me as a small company, I don't have it. So we also need to have overall strategy that then would help and lead fixes in all the rest, because we also need to have better rules to switch from one cloud to another. We need to have some more competition enforcement for DMA, and so on. So I think overarching strategy shall be there.
I think we're seeing maybe this kind of, it's moving in that direction though. If you look at, I do have a feeling that things are happening now compared to, if you look at the last several years, and there just seemed, another thing. And, my feeling is that, we're starting to see some, some of that consolidation and understanding how everything is going to fit together. And I'm also looking forward to the CAIDA, as we, the Cloud AI Development Act. I'm sure everybody knows that, but you're ready to give us some more on what you think Europe needs.
So digital sovereignty is a trust component. We heard Manuel also talk about trust, and others as well too. It's 5 letters, but it's rather difficult. It's a trust component, same as privacy, security, interoperability, and indeed autonomy as a freedom of choice, having meaningful independence and control. So it's a trust component, and it's a qualitative part. Even though we try to quantify it here, is it yay or nay, or whatever you want to do, but it's a trust component. So now looking at procurement, we also heard that public procurement is an important driver to actually spur this, because let's face it, the first generation of what we try to do here, which is highly secure, climate neutral, sovereign, and what have you, is definitely more expensive. Who is willing to pay for that? So public procurement will need to really change their ways. Instead of going from 20% qualitative measuring and 80% price, so quantitative, they need to switch exactly the opposite. Focusing on quality, because let's face it, they're serving a public, they're serving society. It's my data, it's our data. It's our sovereignty, not of the national sovereignty. It's of the public services, right? So it's always good to remember. So if we change the part from qualitative 20 and price 80 in reverse, we give room for SMEs, for mid-cap, for large corps, wherever they are, to actually be, because let's face it, currently it's really about price. And another thing, and that's I already mentioned it, procurement is what is procurement doing? And I'm working for also multiple governmental institutions and the private and the public sector as well. What they do, if the procurement needs to draft a new tender, they pick something that they did before in the zeros, in the tens, or sometimes even the previous century. They change the years and then they submit. And look at have a look at digits call, and not on the framework, but also what is under. So the procurement department, and it's of course it's not in the room here. Procurement department, we need to help them out in getting comfortable in taking in all the things that we created the last 10 years, not only the DMA, DSA, but also all the other ones in the digital age. Let's face it, we went from a nice to have at IT, it's now a need to have, but the paperwork and the procurement is still in a nice to have mode on the seriousness of things. So it's not only changing the ways of calculating, but also, of course, then. So, and my last one is not that in procurement, by the way, that's also for corporates, a supplier or a provider works for the customer. It should be working with the customer. It should be a relationship. So there's room for improvement, room to innovate, instead of having penalties in a clause or in put that, okay, we're gonna to not pay out that particular part, and it's now an innovation budget. Let's use this as innovation. So instead of working for, working with.
Yeah,
that's
like innovation,
really
innovation, procurement, and open collaboration, co-creation. A lot of some of my favorite topics, and now. Indeed, I'm getting excited about procurement. Yes, I have my PhD was on standardization, and I'm excited about procurement. So this is, if you want to sort of eat your dinner alone, these are topics to to bring up. But I'm sure this is a kind of safe space for those preferences. This is indeed, I was interested to hear that we are seeing kind of finally, and I've been talking mostly about open source, lock-in, standards-based procurement for 15 years. And I see some promise here also with the upcoming revision of the Public Procurement Directive, and a chance to sort of bring in some meaningful, as you say, meaningful non-price criteria there, where we can also, in addition to sort of having green procurement, we can also talk about sustainable or resilient, procurement of digital services. For me, as an open source enthusiast, it's also about sort of being able to give preference for companies that contribute back to the sustainability of open source projects and not just use open source code. But so a lot of things happening now. We have 5 minutes left, and so I wanted to give everybody sort of an opportunity to kind of give a closing statement. Maybe sort of the one thing you'd like to see prioritized, or that could strengthen European digital sovereignty in this space. I start with you, Enzo. Yeah. If you want a drink of water first.
I'm okay, thanks. So, sorry, there's a lot. I'm digesting everything that has been said. Yes. So there is a lot to be done. So it's hard to say in 1 second what should be done, because it's not just one thing. We've mentioned a lot of legislations. I think there is a challenge of enforcement on those legislations. If we talk about the Data Act, I think Manuel mentioned before, no standards at the moment, typically for cloud switching, although the obligation applied from September 12th. So how do we ensure cloud switching? In CISPE, what we've done is that for our members, we did a study and sort of a framework for cloud switching that we call that the Cloud Switching and Portability Framework. That's helping our members to be guided at least through how do we comply with this legislation, and also something to defend themselves. Through our framework, they can say, oh, but this provider that you're switching from is not respecting this, and that's the framework we use, and we don't think actually we can port, or that we can, or you can port, or you could switch so easily to us because they don't respect it, and we don't have standards for the Data Act switching and portability obligation, not even entering the interoperability obligation, which is even more technically challenging. The DMA, I think if anybody has a phone in the room, you go in the DMA, you go in Annex 1, and you look at the way they count users so that you know who is a gatekeeper, which apparently on the cloud market don't exist because the DMA has been enforced and is being enforced, and there is no cloud gatekeeper, surprisingly. So it means there is no big company sort of preventing the market from acting as a gatekeeper, which is, I guess, surprising if you know a bit the cloud market. And then public procurement. I think now the discussion is how do we have a legislation that's helping, but the real question is, if the Data Act didn't do it, the DMA didn't do it, how is the public procurement supposed to help it? I think there is a problem out there because public procurement is supposed to leverage the enforcement and implementation of this legislation so that it can help the smaller companies to, be in public procurement, collaborate, federate. Maybe Data Act should help federating cloud services. And in CISPE, again, we end up doing it ourselves. We invested 1 million into an open source software that is now under the governance of an open source foundation in order to help companies to federate their cloud. And we are non-for-profit. And so, we do it because not everyone is doing it. We do it because we believe it's the right way, which I think we share with the public institution, but somehow we're the one pushing for it. For sovereignty is the same. We're developing our label because companies are fighting sovereign washing. And so we develop a label so that companies can be certified against the label the same way we did it for GDPR. You want to demonstrate that you are compliant with GDPR, you use the CISPE GDPR Code of Conduct. In the future, you would be able to use the CISPE sovereignty labeling framework. And you can be, it can help companies, it can help customers, and that's the direction we want to go. So I don't think there is, sorry, I'm very long, but I don't think there is one thing to do. It's a bunch of things that needs to be done. Private sector, non-for-profit, trade association, companies, institutions, all together going in the same direction.
Yes, but thank you for mentioning switching, because of course this is another perennial, I think maybe you're involved in the SWIPO since a long time. I don't remember, for more than a decade. Yeah. This has been a challenge. So, but I think, because in a way, like you could define, or an important part of digital sovereignty is just being able to switch providers and have a meaningful alternative. This is a big part of actually having user control. So, Gina.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do agree with you that government needs to improve its procurement, and that currently we're not very well equipped to assess whether a solution is digitally sovereign or not, and that we mainly focus on costs. So that's why I am excited about the framework, because it will help with the criteria and what we need to look at. In the Netherlands, we have, I'm very excited about the technological innovations, by the way, about the defederation, about decentralized clouds working together as a network. In the Netherlands, we have this very infamous example of a civil servant who built this sort of algorithm toolkit on a schut, who wanted to choose the sovereign option, which is our own government infrastructure. It would have taken him 15 minutes to deploy it on AWS. It has taken him, I think, about 6 months now to have it deployed on government infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, and it's still not there, and it costs 10 times as much. So if we keep on looking at the cost incentive, then yeah, we're going to end up not going with digitally sovereign solutions. So I agree, we need to reframe our procurement and sourcing, but the technological innovations would also definitely help. So I'm very excited about it. I hope the decentralized cloud will eventually, and federated, will eventually come to exist.
Justina?
So I think it's a little bit of cap on very much so what Enzo says, and what I mentioned before, the two keywords, it's ambition and the courage to have one common direction, one goal, be it industrial strategy or called any other way, but something what guides us all to this direction, and then we make sure that all the rest of the rule sets we have are aligned with that common direction. And I think we all have a feeling of that is, and we kind of agree. It's just that we need the decision maker out there to kind of rubber stamp it and say, this is it, we all agree, we all had the feeling that that's the right direction, and then go to that. And not be afraid, because for sure we hear many attacks, we say it's about closing Europe. No, it's not. And I think that we just need to have a little bit of courage to make the step, to do the investment now, to have a more competitive and more innovative future.
Ambition, direction, courage.
Agree.
More to you.
Well, I'll do it as short as Enzo does. Huh? So, no, make a joke, of course. It was one sentence, Enzo. I tried to see whether you had two sentences. It was one long.
You get points. There's coffee. Yeah.
Yeah. So well, anyway, I can a little bit marketing of the EU Alliance. Have a look at if you can become a member. That is always good, even though we are being vetted. You actually need to show certain levels of proper sovereignty there. But the thing I generally miss is actually collaborating together, also between the stack layers, but also throughout the stack, and not just technical, not just entrepreneurial, but also the non-functional. So we just talk about here, including private security, the other one, and the other fun stuff. Switching and exit has been now not solved, but at least have been addressed properly. Article 23 and further, Data Act. There will be a set of standard contractual clauses available, also co-written by yours truly. So if you see any typo, you can sue me for that. And I think it will definitely help, and indeed is one of those subcomponents that will help out in choosing where you work, where you have your workloads, where your data is, but also your artifacts, including also your code. And that's just one little thing, but it's going to be important. And we have the other ones. We sort of need to fill the gap and see what we're missing out on. Meanwhile, indeed, working more between the suppliers, providers, so working, but also collaborate and talking. Because there's still if I do stuff with public sector and private sector at the same meeting, public sector says, can we have a separate room, because we're uncomfortable. So it's really something that I'm trying to facilitate, and we really need to listen better to each other. So that's it for now. Thanks.
Sue me. That was the quote from the panel. Yes, if we didn't cover your favorite topic, then sue us. We're done with the panel. I want to thank my panelists for a great discussion. I'm sure we can continue discussions later over coffee. We have another point on the agenda before that. So
before we
round of
finish,
applause?
I think we can allow only one question from the. Oh, Sachiko, you decide.
Maybe, but maybe we should because there's
Just only one short question with short answer.
Otherwise, continue during the break.
Sachiko, being inspired by your remark about forking, I love these open source speak, by the way. Thank you for that. But I was thinking, this whole framework that seems to be not really taking into account how the governance is being done within those organizations who are delivering those services. Because in the Netherlands, we've seen before that companies can be bought by an American company, right? And then where do you stand with this framework? So I'm a bit worried about that.
Yeah, I think, that's indeed, I think that's something that can always happen. We talk about, now we have a European company that is in the cutting edge of AI or something like that. And of course, we don't, I don't think we have that sort of society where we are able to put controls over such things. That's why, for me, the importance is to really focus on the technology and the governance of that technology being open, identifying what are the critical technologies, having also a critical mass of knowledge and not just one company. So when I talk about open source, I don't want to talk about single vendor open source. It's also about being able to show that you have a diversity of contributions, not just depending on one company or anything like that. So I think that's really, important. But again, those questions we can ask, and you can trigger more reflection around those things, I think. But now I think we should give a round of applause
Absolutely.
to the panelists, and
Thank you very much, Gina, Enzo, Justina, Arthur, and especially to Sachiko.